Hello everyone, I'm Sylvia Richardson. I'm the host of Latin Ways. You can find our work in latinwaysmedia.com. We're very privileged to be joined by Hassan, Yussef, the president of the Canadian Labour Congress. We are live at the People's Social Forum in Ottawa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, many people usually think about the priority of every government is to create jobs. But it's equally important to consider how those jobs will contribute to a society that's sustainable, not just ecologically, but socially sustainable. How do you imagine our organizations, our labor movements, creating new possibilities for community engagement and dealing with some of the issues that have prevented us from having a more expansive vision of what a labor movement can be?
Well, the labor movement, of course, is going through many changes. One is, of course, there are generational changes that are happening. They are as a result of immigration. The diversity of our labor movement is becoming much more entrenched with new realities of people like myself. And at the same time, the labor movement today in the Canadian workforce, half the population of the workforce are women. So we have to reflect that reality and continue to adapt in that realm. Work is critical and important for all of us. I mean, it sustains us, it creates opportunities for us to make a living. And the challenge in regard to jobs in this country has been really the untold story. The government would like to tell us how well they're managing the economy. As I speak to you right now, there's 2 million Canadians either unemployed or underemployed in this country. And for the most part, since 2008, we've had double-digit unemployment for young people who can't find meaningful, full-time, steady jobs. These are the young ones that we were encouraged to go to university and get a good education, but despite their successes, can't find a full-time job that will have them pay a decent salary. They're working part-time, they're working temporary, or they're working contract. And I think we've got to take back this argument fundamentally as a labor movement and challenge both the government and its record, and fundamentally, of course, challenge the corporations who benefit heavily from this government tax cut, yet they have not done anything to invest in creating the kind of jobs this country needs. But at the same time, I think work will also change as we move into this new century. The climate change is a phenomenon of this period in our history, and I think work will have to be transformed over time to ensure that we're not doing and creating harm to the environment at the same time as we're trying to create good, meaningful work. We're working with some coalition partners to talk about how we can create good, green jobs in the economy, jobs that are sustainable but that's not damaging the ecology and the environment. Job that's also that is highly needed, and trying to figure out how we can build a social commitment. The jobs are not simply going to go to one group of people, they're going to go to the marginalized part of our community. If we're looking at solar energy, retrofitting building, how do we create apprenticeship to bring young workers from those communities, give them an opportunity to have a bright future. So this is, I think it's a challenging period, but we also have to equally be visionary as labor leaders as to how we confront this period that we're in.
One of the challenges we face here in Canada is the invisibility of particular groups of people. So we're in Ottawa, and this is the People's Social Forum. We just came from a workshop where we're talking about the right of original languages to be not just revived, but part of the landscape of how we see ourselves and each other. The labor movement throughout its history has had different periods of evolution. There have been many challenges that we need to overcome in terms of how we see our race relations and people like you and I we're not always invited, and as my friend who's Hopi said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So how do we re-energize that connection to our members, because in many ways I think we're not our movement is not threatened by policies by the government. That is one threat, but it's threatened by our own members not seeing themselves as engaged in that as part of that community. Where do you see as being able to create a more embracive vision beyond this capitalist notion of a very simplistic work, whereas I'm looking to hear your vision for.
Well, I think you speak the truth about the challenges that the labor movement faces in a multitude of ways. I mean, its membership is changing, and it's changing rapidly. There is a sense of a new group of workers, and in some cases maybe all workers, not feeling that they're part of the movement, that they're welcome and they're encouraged to participate. Every union needs to work on this. Unfortunately, this phenomenon is not going to go away. It will remain, I think, a challenge for the labor movement. Unions that are committed to embrace diversity as a strength of how they can build their organization and grow their organization will prosper enormously. Ones who reject it and can't figure this out, I think are going to struggle enormously as to how they remain relevant with their members. So, in terms of my history, I was a human rights activist in the movement long before I became a leader in this capacity. So my underpinning, my orientation has always been, how do I look at my job with a human rights lens and a focus? So whenever I look at the challenges that as we're talking about, I see it as an opportunity. You think of all the enrichment that can come from the labor movement if we were to open up our spaces and allow people to be more engaged and more participatory. Yeah, it means we may have to change how we do certain things, but by the way, that will not destroy our movement, it will strengthen our movement. But at the same time, if you bring those voices who feel marginalized and left out, the union become that much more of a force and much more solid in regard to defending and of course fighting for its members when they're struggling with an employer that may be mean, or a government that may be determined that they're going to push the union back. Because the workers don't identify with their union, why would they want to fight to defend their union? If the workers feel the union is not a voice for their own struggles, why would they join the union when the union is trying to fight a government and attacking them at the same time? So these are some fundamental contradictions that we have to deal with. And when they're raised, we should say, okay, how do we deal with that? Rather than to try and challenge the people who are raising them. Because when I was a young activist in my union, racism was very prevalent. And I remember very much how important that I saw my union as a vehicle to help fight that racism. At times I felt my union let me down, and at times I felt my union was absolutely great on this issue. They gave me political space, they gave me support, but I can't give up on my union. It's like your family, sometimes family relationships are not the best. But the one thing about family, you can't divorce yourself. You can think you can divorce yourself from your family, but you really can't. And the labor movement, I think, have to struggle sometimes with these challenges. I do have to say also, but there's a lot of unions who recognize that these issues are fundamental to the strength of the union.
Now, I've been a union member since I was a child, perhaps by relations, my entire family were union activists. And so there's a clear guidance that I think having a strong union creates in a community. And I'm curious about your formation. How did you become involved in the union movement?
Well, it certainly wasn't my choice. I knew nothing about unions. I was working in a workplace, and at some point in my consciousness, I decided that I needed a raise. And I asked my supervisor to get me a raise, and only to come back and told me it was going to be an insignificant raise, which I was not very pleased with. I bought a paper and I looked in one ad and saw a job I thought was exactly what I was doing, except it was paying $3.35 more per hour. I got on a bus, went to make an application, and I was working in a union environment. I knew nothing about unions. I was too young to even appreciate what unions represented. And after a very short period, of course, understood very much that the reason I was making $7.35 versus $4 was because there was a union. I had great benefits in that environment and in that workplace. And a large part of it, I felt respected by management in the workplace. But I still was not a union member in the traditional way that I was active and engaged. And when they kept asked me to go to a meeting, as a matter of fact, he did it 3 times because I was so stubborn and apathetic about my own life, I didn't go. So the 3rd time actually I thought about it and I did go to the meeting. And I was intrigued by the discussion and more importantly intrigued by the opportunities and possibilities of what the union could do. And I thought, this may be my calling. So I got involved with the union at a very young age and have been privileged in the sense that I was able to hold elected office at a very young age, learn and grow in those experiences one after the other, but also always saw the union as a vehicle to help make working people's life better. And that's what got me involved.
There are many people in our unions who are in the same situation, who become members of a union simply because they need a job. And so in many ways, that is the question. Why should people in the community who are not members of a union care about the union?
Well, they should care very much, because if you think of everything that affect working people's life in this country, what are laws that determine whether you're going to get overtime pay or what your hour is going to be, whether or not if you get injured you're going to get compensated, what health and safety protection you're entitled to when you go to work. All of these underpinning that protects us in societies only came about because of union struggles to improve the legislative protection for workers in this country. So even though people who have never paid a penny and never will pay a penny to the union movement benefit day in and day out right across this country, the entire workforce that go to work and benefit from the protection they have under legislation. And even though we know we need to go farther in many pieces of our legislation to protect workers, that come about because of union struggle day in and day out throughout this country to ensure that we're fighting on behalf of all Canadians, not just members who belong to. That's why I think those who doesn't belong to our movement should care, because without us, there will be little protection in this country for workers who go to work every day who doesn't have a union movement.
Many people within the union movement are people who have very expensive visions of society, who want a world without capitalism, who want a world beyond the constraints of just, an economic system that deforms us in many ways, right? Because we're put in competition with one another rather than in collaboration or in communities of people who care for one another. How do you see us moving forward? How do we create a vision that is inclusive of all those differences and diversity of opinions? Because right now, many of our unions do not allow that kind of political freedom or even expression within our locals.
Well, it varies. I know I go to a lot of union conventions, and I enjoy them enormously, including the CLC convention. I always think that conventions are very organic to the institutions that workers belong to. Our conventions is a multitude of opinions that's expressed on the floor, and I always leave convention energized by the hopefulness that when people speak. Our unions are not, I can't say we're a perfect organization. We are a reflection of those who make up that organization. And union changes all the time. They change by leader, they change with policy, they change with activism. And I simply say to people who sometimes get frustrated, I understand their frustration, but fundamentally unions are a democratic organization. From time to time, they will go through some dramatic changes, and they will reflect, the workers that are pushing for a certain direction of the union. And sometimes people are going to feel frustrated the union is not going far enough. They're doing. But we also have to recognize that we're a very broad movement. I wish all the members that we represent would represent a certain political milieu. That's not the reality. Our members are very monolithic in their thinking and their ideas and their vision. Our job, though, as union leaders, is to fundamentally engage in our members and what kind of vision we have for our society and for our unions, and how do we try to bring them closer to that vision rather than fundamentally prevent them from appreciating that. And I think that's always a challenge in union, because you're balancing all the interests in the union and trying to move the union forward as one vehicle to protect and defend all its members. Mm-hmm. And it's never easy, but as we know, these are not easy in social organization and other political organization either. It's a challenge, and we need to continue to work, because union leaders fundamentally need to lead and to ensure that their vision about an inclusive movement, an inclusive society, is one that the members should embrace. And of course, it takes work to get them there, but it's important for us to do that work.
My last question to you is that we live in a society that has been marked by the history of colonization, a history of racism, and over 5,000 years of patriarchy. It precedes our colonizing process, right? And so in many ways, when you go to a conference as a woman, you see that that's still very much alive today. That women are not as equally represented within our movements, that we don't have equal pay for same work, that we don't have the same protections we have Indigenous women, who have been disappearing in this country without proper legal process to investigate the nature of their death. And so to me, we we as union movement, as one of many grassroots movements, have a responsibility. How do we respond to this moment?
Well, I think that what's been very much, I think, a reality of Canadian society, and I think to a large extent other societies, is that we're evolving. We've got a long way to go to where women will truly enjoy total equality in our society, where the underpinning of our society is that it's exploitive. And of course, women has been there far longer in that exploitive situation. Patriarchy is an underpinning how the society still operate today. But there have been changes that I think we can all say that we've come some distance. We've got a long way to go. I think in the context of the labor movement is that unfortunately, women, I shouldn't say unfortunately, fortunately, the labor movement will continue to benefit with the growth of women in the workforce. Over 50% of the workforce today are women. So we have to be in the forefront fighting on those issues that are paramount in women's lives, whether it's violence against women, whether it's pay equity, whether it's issues around economic and social justice, to ensure that these are paramount in the agenda of our organization. Because if we're not, women should fundamentally ask, what is the role of our union? Because the union should be there fighting the same struggles and battles on a day-to-day basis. We've also been blessed with this period that today there are far more women leadership in our movement. We can do better, and we should do better, but there are far more women in leadership position of our union. And I think women leadership, of course, bring their experience, they bring, of course, their opportunity to figure out how we can keep building and changing our organization. I'm excited, certainly within my context of the CLC, 2 of my officers are women, the Secretary Treasurer and the Vice President, and of course a lot of the directors and staff are women. I'm making some decisions right now as I try to bring new people on in the staff of the Congress, and my fundamental underpinning is how could I bring more women on a key position in the political organization, because they'll bring a different perspective. But also at the same time, I'm struggling with the whole question of race. It's not just a monolithic group of women. It's women that also represent the diversity of women's voices in our society. So it's a challenge. It's not easy. I can tell you I had to make a decision this morning, and yesterday was not an easy one. I'll have to make a decision within the next couple of days about another appointment. And I'm constantly figuring, here's my thinking, here's my prejudice, because I could declare it up front. But the reality is, at some point, I still have the tough job of having to decide, who's going to occupy that job. And how do I ensure that their skills and ability and, of course, leadership are going to help me do a better job on behalf of workers across this country.
Thank you. I encourage women who are listening to this program to not only be engaged, but perhaps be in contact and to be part of the change we want to create. So thank you very much for your support.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.